I'm Kelly Rach, your warrior dietitian who fights with you and for you to break free from the burdens of food, body, and weight obsession. And today we are kicking off the virtual grand opening and ribbon cutting opening of Embrace Eating Recovery in Fredericksburg, Virginia. But I will also be offering virtual services, and helping me out with that and aligning with the National Eating Disorder Awareness Week and the theme of Come As You Are is my friend and colleague, executive director over at Rock Recovery in the Washington, D.C. metro area, Christie Dondero-Bettwy. Did I say that right?
You did. Good job.
All right. Yeah. Well, first of all, just thank you so much for joining me to just help celebrate the grand opening of Embrace Eating Recovery and walking beside me, and also just coming alongside all those who are watching who are struggling or have a loved one struggling with an eating disorder. And today we really just want to hear a little bit more about your journey, because you're the executive director at Rock Recovery, but not as a clinician, as someone who has a personal story and who has overcome and walked through the difficulty of identifying an eating disorder and trying to learn what it takes to get out of that. And so I just would want to open up this opportunity for you to share a little bit more about that experience.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. And I always say I have no fancy letters after my name, like a lot of my lovely clinician friends like yourself, but I do have a story which gives me some street cred. And I always like to remind people too, everyone's story is very unique and very different, but I hope that you can pull some nuggets of wisdom or helpfulness out of what God's done in my life and what's happened in my own recovery story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me,
so go ahead. Yeah. How's that journey go for you? Like, what is that journey?
Well, it's so interesting. And I feel like I'm seeing this a lot more with our work at Rock Recovery and a lot of people that I even talk to in my friend group, where it's really easy to develop disordered eating and food issues and not realize it because our culture is so weight obsessed, thin ideal obsessed. And there's just kind of this war and attack on our bodies in a lot of different ways, especially as women. And it happens to men and everyone too. But I've just sort of realized, gosh, a lot of us are being held captive and we don't even realize that we're not free. And for me, that happened at a really early age, and really dieting was one of the biggest contributors. And then it sort of happened over and over the years. But I always say my first issue with food probably started at the age of 8. When we were 8, my sister and I were sat down at our kitchen table and told we were moving from Pennsylvania to Texas. And we always say we thought our parents were telling us we were getting a puppy or going to Disney World. I had no vocabulary and no part of my brain for big life changes in other states. I was convinced they were just tumbleweeds and things happening in Texas, which turns out there weren't many where I grew up in Dallas. But we moved at a really early age, and I just didn't have any coping skills or resilience. And it was really, really hard for me. So I had bad anxiety, really was uncomfortable, would call in sick from the nurse every day. My poor mom had to come get me all the time. The nurse knew me before I even walked in the door, because I just felt such anxiety and such fear and really such depression, I think too, that I didn't know how to cope with this big change. And my poor parents did the best they could and tried really hard to support me and be patient with me, but push me in the right ways. And I think one of the things that I learned early on was food as a coping tool. There were a lot of times where I think I was given a cookie or a brownie or something to kind of help soothe me and then help me to kind of move on with my day. And while it probably helped in the moment, I think in my brain, it kind of taught me this is the way to comfort. This is the way to dealing with life.
Wow. That must have been it kind of confusing and, difficult to manage if you felt like that was the only coping tool, because that must have been maybe even secretive.
Yeah. And I remember, I have a really bad spotty memory from my childhood, but I do remember sneaking into the pantry and getting things that my parents didn't know about and sort of being secretive, because now I can look back and say oh, I was feeling uncomfortable. I had some tough feelings of rejection or insecurity, and I would immediately go to the pantry with those feelings. I wouldn't process them or go to my parents or go to a friend. I would go to the pantry. Yeah. So it was really tricky.
Yeah.
And then from there, I got really serious about ballet. I wanted to do whatever my big, wonderful sister did, and she got into ballet. So when I was about 11, 12, started getting really serious and danced pretty much all throughout high school. And of course, ballet, lots of full-length mirrors, lots of people in leotards, and lots of focus on your body. It's a very aesthetic-based activity. And so although I knew like food was my way to get through life, like I also knew I had to look a certain way to get the parts I wanted, to feel comfortable, and to really be acceptable. And I'm a people pleaser and a words of affirmation person. And I started to notice, oh, like the thinner girls got the better parts. And there were certain things that my body was not genetically built to do that other people's were. So I restricted my food to make my body look a little different. And it
Mm-hmm.
never got out of hand in a serious way, but it was certainly disordered. And when I quit ballet at the age of 17, I remember for the first time sitting at TGI Fridays with my friend Michelle. I was wearing jean shorts and an ugly pink halter top. And I remember thinking when the waitress came over and said, "Do you want dessert?" and thinking, yes, I can say yes to this again.
Mm.
And since I had restricted, I kind of went on the other end and just said yes all the time to everything. And of course, what happened was my body changed and I gained weight. And I was really uncomfortable with my body shifting and changing because even though I wasn't a ballerina, I still found my identity in being one. And my
Mm-hmm.
body was a big part of that. So it was really challenging for me to have those body changes. So I did what probably any person would have done and told you to do is I went to see a personal trainer and I went on a diet, which that decision was probably the most dangerous thing I've ever done in my entire life, was choosing to
Mm-hmm.
go on that diet at the age of 17.
Right. And, it's interesting that you kind of look back and say it's the most dangerous decision because we don't get that message from the culture around us, right? Like we get that message that that is the right thing to do and that is the best thing you can do is exercise and diet.
Right. Right. And weight loss is glorified. I remember when I went on this diet and lost the weight and maybe even then some, and I got so many compliments and so much attention and so much affirmation. And for me, when I was like this affection hungry, like an affirmation hungry person, I was just sort of, wow, like this is what I need to do to be safe, to be
Mm-hmm.
seen, to be loved, to be accepted, all these things that I really wanted, but couldn't put words to. But I was like, oh, I can do this. I can keep my food rules. I can keep this under control. Like this gives me
Mm-hmm.
power. This gives me what I thought was peace, but really was captivity. And it just made me feel something really different. But I couldn't put words to that's what was happening. But since culture really affirms weight loss, it put me into
Mm-hmm.
a really unhealthy pattern.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. And so, well, what happened next for you?
So I was still angry about being taken to Texas at the age of 8, that when I was 18 and could leave, I left immediately. So I applied to all these different schools and wound up going to North Carolina State University, which was great. And I, again, wasn't really prepared for this big life change. That big life change was moving for me at the age of 8. Other big life change, moving again, even though it's by choice, still a big change, lots of new environments, not knowing
Mm-hmm.
people, not having your parents to be attached to anymore. Like there were a lot of really big changes for me. And all I knew what to do was to kind of turn my energy, turn my discomfort either into food or away from food. I was either,
Mm-hmm.
binging or restricting or paying attention to it or trying to be better than it and trying to keep all these safe things in my food rules. So all throughout college, I really struggled with binging and restricting in these cycles of binge purge cycles and over exercising cycles where I would want to look a certain way for this event or want to do a certain thing, and I would just become obsessed. And I didn't realize it was unhealthy or unhelpful because so many people around me were doing the same things. I was in a wonderful sorority, but a lot of us, when we went to dinner at night, I remember like we would just sort of look at each other's foods and affirm certain things and stay quiet about other things. And there was just this weird sense of like we were all sort of in a disordered pattern a lot of the time because we wanted to
Mm-hmm.
look a certain way. And it's just what you did as a woman. It seemed like it was just kind of our plight in life and what we signed up for, even though we did not sign up for it.
Right. That makes sense. And so having so many people doing the same thing together, it definitely, you can see why it doesn't seem like it's a problem when there's so
Right.
much agreement around it.
Right. But kind of to your point earlier about the secrecy and me going and sneaking food, there were also a lot of things I did in secret throughout college that probably weren't something a lot of the other girls were doing, where I'd skip classes to go to the gym, or I'd skip meals out with friends to go eat my safe food in my little mini fridge in my room, So there were definitely effects on both my body and my spirit and also just my relationships. It was this really isolating time, which eating in a group brought me severe anxiety. I didn't like eating in front of other people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not good. It was not right. It was not healthy, and it wasn't freedom for sure. But I just didn't really understand that it could be a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. I see a lot of the people that come my way having that secrecy. And then with that kind of comes, some of that shame and guilt that they are
Yeah.
hiding that secret. And so a lot of times I might be one of the first people that they're opening up to. And so what was that like for you to get to a point where you were doing that? Like, how did you get to where you could tell people?
Gosh, such a good question. So I graduated college, another big change no one prepares you for, and went through a really rough time where I had a friend pass away from cancer, got a really tough, stressful job where I was working 60 hours a week after having my first
Wow.
coffee at 10 a.m. and then going to an 8 a.m. work day. It was a big change, a lot of stress. And I started having really severe anxiety attacks. And
Mm.
really, again, my food became an issue. And a lot of that binge purge, I think, was really relating to my anxiety and causing my anxiety. But I was sort of spiraling into a much worse place where things were getting bad. I was calling sick to work and there were a lot of bad things happening. But I didn't mean to tell anybody that I had an eating disorder because I didn't even know that I had one. But one night I was out at a bar on the weekend, as I often was, my other coping tool, unfortunately, often turned into that in my college days. And I met this wonderful man who started chatting with me and asked what I did on the weekends. And he said he started going to this really cool church. Did I want to come with him? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. That sounds fine. And, you know, I was raised quasi-Catholic, said I was a spiritual person, but didn't have a religious background and didn't have any really other beliefs besides that I felt like I could kind of create my own spirituality and sort of, you know, pave my own way. But I said, sure, I'll go to church with you. So a month or two later, I went to church with him, and there was this course being run called New ID, which is a 6-week course for anyone struggling with an eating disorder. And I remember when the lovely British woman, Kim Hemsley, went up to make her announcement, I remember thinking, oh, I definitely don't have an eating disorder, but I bet this course will help me lose more weight. So like, what a great idea. I should sign up. So now I always say that God tricked me twice, once with the lovely
Oh,
guy and then once with my promised ideal of weight loss. Cause I was like, this will be the ticket out of this place. You know, this will be
right.
my solution. And so the first night of the New ID course, I showed up and the topic is all about, there's teaching and discussions and testimonials and prayer time. And the first week's all about what are eating disorders and what is freedom. And as the teacher was explaining what eating disorders are, I sort of thought, well, an expletive that I won't say, but I was sort of like, wow, I have an eating disorder and I had no idea. Like I was shocked. I was shocked. But the second I figured out I had a problem, I was like, okay, let's go fix this thing. So the first people I really voiced it to were people at the support group at the church. And then later on that night, I got home from the course and thought, great, I'm going to figure out where I went wrong. I've been journaling since I was 8, pulled out all my old journals and piled them around my bed and was like reading through them. I mean, it got a little like more exciting after the age of 10, I suppose. But like, you know, there was a lot of things I was writing about. And my roommate at the time, Nancy, came home and she was like, hey, sweetie, what are you doing? How was tonight? How did it go? And I was like, well, Nancy, I learned that I have an eating disorder and I need to get better. And she was like, okay, cool. Maybe you should call somebody who can help you with that. And she was lovely and supportive. My roommate, she was delightful. But it did kind of dawn on me. I was like, oh, I really do need to call someone for help. And the next day, there was always a scripture that we went over at New ID. And the first week was Paul saying, I do not know what I do for what I want to do. I do not do what I hate. I do for I desire what's good, but I cannot carry it out. And the very next day I started getting a scripture a day emailed to me. And that was the scripture that came through my inbox. And I wasn't even a believer yet. I was sort of on the fence about this whole God thing. I felt
Oh,
like this didn't
wow.
make any sense. But that just made me bawl. And I just felt like, okay, God, like you're here, you care, and you want me to do something about this. Like you really are calling me to something more. So I decided to call a psychologist. Actually later on that day, I made the call, made my appointment with my wonderful, delightful psychologist named Melissa, who was just such a huge, huge help in my recovery process.
That's awesome. Wow. That's quite a journey. So it sounds like for a long, long time, you had an eating disorder, but it was so normal and natural and comfortable and safe for you that you had no idea that that's actually what was going on. And then God led you, or tricked you, as you might say, to, to a church where it kind of was unveiled to you. And then here you are immediately seeking help, seeing the destruction that the behaviors have caused in your life. What are some of the things that the eating disorder took away from you?
Oh, it's such a good question and such a tough question. And I feel like that first night of New ID really helped me because it was almost the absence of freedom that made me realize like, oh, this isn't right. I didn't like eating with friends. Like I said earlier, I'd skip birthday parties, skip different group activities. If I felt like I'd eaten too many calories that day, like my life didn't matter. All that mattered was these numbers that I was tracking and these goals that I was going after. So I'd become so isolated and so afraid of connection with other people and afraid of not being in control, especially with food in my body in particular. And I feel like it just hurt my ability to really listen to people, because I'd be at lunch with someone or I'd be somewhere with somebody and I'd just be so distracted by what they were eating or what they weren't eating or what I was doing. And I felt like I couldn't listen to my friends and really be present because I was panicking internally, counting the calories and doing all the different things that kind of kept me from really being a friend and really listening and caring for the people that I deeply loved. And it just made me kind of difficult sometimes. Like I was just so rigid and I felt like if anything changed in my day, like I would kind of fall apart. And it just made my life really inflexible, which was just, that's not how life works. Life, you have to be flexible.
Yeah, I mean, that makes it a little bit easier to navigate the things that come our way, doesn't it, Christie?
Yeah, it does.
As you're talking about just the comparison to the calories and what they're eating and stuff, I was reminded of the common quote that we hear: comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that speaks volumes. So Teddy Roosevelt, I think, is the one who coined that phrase, and I use it all the time with my clients. And it's such a reminder that when we are comparing, then we're searching for something that we think is going to give us something we don't already have, and it just takes away our joy. I mean, I think it's so profound to hear that.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize, it's sort of like the Mother Teresa, to bring Mama T into this, the quote too: if you judge others, you have no time to love them. And when I was comparing myself to people, either what they were eating, how they looked, size, whatever it was, it took away my ability to really truly love them, because there was this fear-based comparison and judgment that was happening. And it wasn't my intent, it wasn't my desire, but it was just sort of out of my own fear. I think it was where I put my energy, like the things I didn't know where else to channel it, just sort of channeled into this comparison. Especially being in ballet, you're sort of taught, like, notice how this person is doing this and emulate it. So that was really tough for me to restructure and to change.
Right. That makes sense. And that's really a beautiful way to think about it. Like, not only is it taking away stuff from you personally, but that personal ability to be engaged in these more intimate relationships. So I'm really glad that you brought that point up.
Yeah, it's tricky.
So this year, Nita's theme is "Come as You Are." And immediately for me, as a fellow believer, I immediately come and think of "Come as You Are" to the cross. So I'm wondering how the theme of "Come as You Are," what that means to you and the journey that you've been on, Christie.
Well, I feel like for me, Jesus invites us to come as we are, right? Like God tells us to come, not when we fixed up our act, not when we're doing better, not when we've done this 10-step plan, like immediately, like we're allowed to come, like turn and repent and to come to him. And that happens all throughout the Gospels, of people just like repenting and believing. And even just coming in the midst of their sin and their shame and all the different things, right? And I sort of had my conversion experience and came to faith through my recovery. So I came as I was in that space. Like I didn't know how else to pretend. I think I finally was sick and tired of being sick and tired. We often hear that phrase. And the good thing about my coming to faith through recovery, a lot of wonderful, faithful people of faith, of course, struggle with disordered eating and eating disorders. And it's not an issue. Like God still loves them. God's still in it. But for me, as I was going through conversion and recovery, I really realized I had to fully surrender and I couldn't hold anything back. And I didn't like just patch up a few walls or like paint something. Like I tore down the house that I had built and started on a new foundation, but I had to come as I was first, and God had to do that work in me. It wasn't like I had to go clean it up, right, and then come. So just to be able to come and to surrender and be authentic, like to be honest with myself, with the thoughts that I had, the feelings I had, the things that were going on, and knowing like these feel like they're so scary and can kill me, but God can handle it. And like, this is something that can still be redeemed and still be okay. And it made me really think about too, as I was going through recovery, I really realized I'd been living for others for a long time and conforming to the patterns of the world. Right. And so, I had kind of bought into this idea, like you have to look a certain way and be a certain way. This will make me acceptable. This will make me okay. And that wasn't how God created me. That wasn't the body I was given or the life that I was given. And so to really go through recovery meant accepting how I was created and the body that God gave me, and being able to really show up in that, like as I was, not having to clean it up, change it, do whatever before I was acceptable or pleasing to anybody else, let alone God.
Right. That's got to give you just such a sense of freedom when you do just kind of bring that to the cross, bring it to Jesus and just lay it down and surrender it. Like you have so much more movement in the process of recovery because you're not confined by all the rules and the rigidity and the expectations and the comparisons.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of showed me, like, I was keeping these things on myself. Like, they weren't given to me. Like, I was sort of choosing them in a way. Like, yes, culture and society plays a role on these things. And there's a lot of other behavioral things and mental things and genetic things happening, right, with disordered eating. But I sort of felt like, oh, I have a choice in this to think differently, to live differently, to accept something differently. And I got married a couple of years ago, and it was great. And I was at one of my heaviest weights I've probably ever been, just because bodies change and things happen. And I'm 35 and I'm a grown up now, I guess. So like these things happen, right? And I remember that day, I just all day long, you know, everyone's like, oh, you're so beautiful. You're so this, you're so that. And all day long, I was just like, I know, like I am the prettiest bride. I look so good. Like, can you believe it? And I just think back to when I was struggling with my eating disorder, and like I never would have believed I was beautiful, even if I was at that perfect size I wanted to be. You know, I never would have felt comfortable. I never would have felt like accepted and able to come as I was. And like it was just such a joy and such a freedom to not have to confine or conform to these false expectations, but to really be like who I was created to be.
That's such an encouragement to other people, I think, to know that you can really overcome it. And when you come to Jesus and hold hands with him and walk life with him, that he really releases you to be able to feel the beauty that he's given you and wants for you to live in this world. And then of course that's his light shining in you for others to see. And that's just a beauty that can't be touched by the world.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's something so much deeper and more beautiful.
Yeah. So your eating disorder went kind of unheard by you and others for a really long time. What would be a few things that you might encourage those that are watching today just to be thoughtful of or mindful of with their own relationship with food and body that might be a signal that they are struggling with an eating disorder?
What a great question, and what a tough question. I think one of the things would be paying attention to what you're paying attention to. So when I look back to when I was sick and when I was struggling, my thoughts and my brain always went back to the calorie counting, to what I was going to eat, to what I wasn't going to eat, to what I was going to do. So pay attention to what you're paying attention to. How much energy are you expending on food and body and these things? And what do you want your energy to be going towards? You know, there's this idea of our value system. And if we don't really ruthlessly figure out what it is that we value, our time and energy are going to go into these other things that maybe we don't actually value, but we're living like we do. So pay attention to what you're paying attention to, for sure, is probably one of the biggest things I can say. And if friends bring concern to you, like listen to them. That's one of the hardest things. I'm so stubborn and prideful. My poor sweet husband has to deal with me a lot. But I feel like there may have been people over the years who maybe mentioned things to me that I've probably blocked out. But if people start to come to you being like, hey, how you doing? Like, I'm a little worried about you. Or like, why'd you do that? Or why are you doing this? Like, listen, because people who love you, they're for you. It might feel like they're against you, but they're really for you.
That's such good encouragement. I see that a lot again with the people that I see, that they just they don't want to hear it. But then when they've gotten to that place in recovery, they recognize they were right. The loved ones were right with what they were seeing, and they come back and, you know, they make amends if there had been difficulties there. So well, what are some other things that maybe you feel like you've learned throughout your recovery process that you want to make sure that people hear about today that might help them in their journey?
So many things. Maybe I'll make you read my journals so you can hear all I think I've learned over the years. I think the biggest thing I learned through the recovery journey is I couldn't do it alone. And that was hard because we do live in a very self-sufficient based culture and society where there's a lot of value, whether or not we realize it, especially in Washington, D.C. Type A is like a compliment, you know, like if you're not type A, you're kind of like, oh, interesting, what's wrong with you? But really, there's a lot of bad things that come from being type A, especially as it relates to faith and childlike faith in particular, right? But But I think what I realized was there's three things I always say that really helped me in my recovery, which were my faith, my experts in my community. Like, so we need other people, we need other things. We can't do this on our own. And my experts were just so pivotal because my friends and my family were there for me. They loved me. They supported me. They were really delightful. But something about having an expert who really understood the behavior, where it was coming from, how to help me, to give me tools, and to help really navigate the hard process of recovery, which feels like 10 steps back, 1 step forward, but really over time, you really do inch forward. And my psychologist was super helpful for me in getting the tools and behaviors and things that I needed to feel like I had another way out. I didn't have to turn to food. I didn't have to turn to exercise. Like I had other things I could do. And my dietitian was super helpful with that too, with navigating intuitive eating and figuring out how I could listen to my body and not fight it. Because for years I was afraid of my hunger and fought my body. And I needed to learn how to trust it, which took an expert. It wasn't just going to be me alone, like reading some stuff on the internet. Like it really took an expert. In the community piece, there's something about voicing your struggles to other people that decreases shame. And you can feel so much shame when you struggle with an eating disorder, even though there is no shame, there's no condemnation, but it can feel really tough. So to voice it with those that you love and with safe people can be really healing, and it builds an accountability as well to help you navigate those hard days, because there'll be hard days. There'll be really good days, and eventually the good will outnumber the really, really hard. But the hard days can be good too. There's fruit in those hard seasons, in those winter seasons.
Definitely.
And then the faith piece. I mean, I don't know what I would have done if the Lord hadn't intervened. I really feel like God just like came down and like grabbed hold of me in a really beautiful and wonderful way. And while it was painful and hard at first, like I could not have done the hard things without really relying on the Lord and leaning on the Lord, not my own understanding, but really feeling like God has me, God is for me, God created me, God loves me. Like these are things I need to remember above all else. And that was just pivotal in my identity, knowing I was a child of God first and foremost, and like everything else was secondary to that. Yeah, so those were probably the most helpful things for me.
Awesome. I love that. Just kind of recapping that faith community and experts were really pivotal to the foundation of your recovery, and kind of leaning on all those. And I mean, I think it's so important to hear from all of those, because eating disorders, as you know, they're pretty isolating, and you do things on your own and you pretend you don't have it, or you start skipping those social things. And so getting a community, getting that place where you can start to share your story. And there are lots of people out there with the same story. The way they got there just might be a little bit different, right? With the eating disorder being the story, but how they got there, the journey to it is a little bit different. And I love that you're recognizing that helps to reduce that shame. And, you know, in the world there's shame, but with Jesus, there is no condemnation. That guilt, the shame is gone. Like he took that for us. And so your journey through all of this has just been, it's been a long journey, but here you are now, free and living fully in Christ. And it sounds like, from the things that I know about you and your work with Rock Recovery, that he's really inspired you and given you a heart to serve those who have struggled with the same thing that you struggled with. And so kind of tell me a little bit more about Rock Recovery and how it came to existence, and what you guys do for the DC metro area.
Sure. And I will say, I love that God redeems, because I feel like it's really easy to kind of initially wish, when you're in the early stages of recovery, like, I wish this never happened. I wish I didn't have an eating disorder. Can't we just like magic wand it away?
Yep.
But now my work with Rock Recovery is just such a strong testimony to God's redemption and how he doesn't waste our pain, you know, and there really is fruit that comes from these struggles. And even if we feel abandoned and alone, we're not, which is really hard to remember and to believe, but we're not. And so Recovery, yeah, we're a DC-based organization, and we really just try to help people believe that full recovery and freedom is possible. And there's a lot of barriers, as we all know, that people can anticipate and run into as they're seeking help. And I always say it's hard enough to want to get better, but then once you decide I have a problem and I want help, like, it can be hard to access it depending on where you live and your insurance and what you can afford and what you can get. So Rock really tries to remove all those barriers for people, where we provide outpatient transitional care to help people live their full daily lives. We're not a fancy higher level of care, but we are really on this outpatient ground level, where we partner with clinicians and lovely people to help our clients find freedom. And we remove barriers of cost. We help people break isolation by being in group meals. We do a lot of breaking bread together, and that is such a healing process for us as we eat meals together in community. And we just really do different therapeutic things, family support, mentorship, chaplaincy, help people do whatever they need to do to get that freedom. And we do a lot of education and work in the community and with churches in particular, because it's really tough to know what steps to take. And we try to help empower either the churches or the schools with the tools that they need so they can refer out appropriately, because this does require expert care and good intentions aren't enough sometimes. So we're working to educate the community that there's no shame, there's no stigma. We need to all seek help when we need it, and that's okay, and that recovery is possible. So we do a lot of works and workshops like that as well.
Awesome. Is there a particular age group that you all serve?
Currently, we work with mostly adults, so 18 and up for our recovery programs, but we do our educational workshops with really all ages. And we're hoping to do a little more with adolescents in the future. We actually just moved into our first ever office space of our own yesterday.
Congratulations.
We'll be building some furniture this week and figuring it all out. So it's going to be great. So with this new space comes a lot of new dreams for us. And it's our 10th anniversary in March, which is amazing. And I can't
awesome.
believe it. So what we're really figuring out next is, what are we going to do now that we've built this space and God's provided here? And we're looking to be nationwide, hopefully one day, and do a few pilots in the next few years and figure out this need is clearly not going away, unfortunately. And we think we have a really great gift to offer communities that we'd love to do more of it.
That is so awesome. Well, where can people find you on the web?
Oh, the internet, yes. So our website is rockrecoveryed.org, and then our Facebook page is Rock Recovery ED, and I think our Twitter and Instagram handle is just Rock Recovery. So there's lots of Rock Recoveries out there, so if it looks like a rock band, it's not us. Just trying to figure out who we are. But yeah, we'd love for people to come find us and connect with us in different ways.
And if you're looking for Rock Recovery, looking for that logo, it goes nicely with part of the theme, which is bridging, right? So you've got the bridge going there, and that's at the beautiful green. So it's another way to look for that Rock Recovery logo. Now, Christie, do you guys have some of the new ID courses getting ready to start?
We do. We're always planning on doing more. So we like to offer them a couple times a year. And there is a curriculum and training that anyone can run it across the nation with the right training. So that's something that could be open to a lot of different people.
Okay. So as we close this Come As You Are theme this week, I'm wondering if there is just one last message that you would like to leave the listening audience with today.
Oh, wow. What a great question. I think I just want to encourage everybody that freedom is possible, and that baby steps get you there, and that they might seem so small, but that every faithful step that we all take is bringing us closer to that freedom and to that next place. So don't give up. Believe that there's something more for you, and that you're really loved and accepted as you are.
Amen. Well, Christie, thank you so much for joining me on this virtual grand opening day and NEDA Awareness Week, the theme Come As You Are. We are so excited to partner with you for this and to have Rock Recovery so close. And we're grateful for the work that you do up there and the service that you're giving to those who have otherwise a harder time getting access to that treatment and those services. So just thank you so much. And I can't wait to chat with you. And once you guys get that building all put together, we'll come up and see you and have a little coffee or something.
That'll be great. I'll take it. That sounds great. We can celebrate. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christie.